Trump came out yesterday and said what I suppose you might have expected him to say, which is it's time to end this ridiculous war. I'm assuming that you'll be in favour of this.
Well, I'd be in favour of ending it, but I'm not sure that Donald J. Trump has any particular ideas as to how to set about it. And both Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky are very much cemented in their positions. Putin can't really make much in the way of concessions without falling into grave trouble with the ultra-nationalists who stand behind him. And the same is largely true of Vladimir Zelensky. If he were to make any major concessions, I think that he would be destroyed by his own supporters, particularly those from west of Ukraine, who are ferociously anti-Russian and regard any kind of compromise, as they always say, the word they use is capitulation. So I don't think either of them is particularly free to move, and I'm not sure that Donald Trump has any way of breaking that. As far as I can tell, the only threats he's making are economic, and I'm really not sure that trade and business between Russia and the United States is that great that the loading tariffs on Russian imports and all this is going to have much effect. If that's all he's got, then I don't think he'll get very far. There may be something else that he's cooking up. I simply don't know. But I was never, as you know, I'm not wild about Mr. Trump, put it mildly. I had ran into some trouble at a debate on Monday in London for being critical of him. And I don't think that he necessarily has a particularly intelligent or worked out view. A lot of people imagine, because of the crazy claims that he was in Putin's pocket during his first presidential campaign, a lot of people imagine that there is some great friendship between him and the Kremlin. I don't think that's necessarily true. And again, if he hasn't got any more than that, I can't quite see how he's going to get it. And it's not necessarily in the interests of either leader to actually have peace. Some sort of stalemate may well be what ultimately emerges, a permanent frozen conflict. So let's see what he comes up with. He has capacity to surprise. On the other hand, an awful lot of Donald Trump's actions since the inauguration have basically been public relations. Their statements, he issues all these presidential orders, but many of them will be very hard to implement. It looks good, it sounds good, it makes his supporters feel good, but in practice, what will it add up to? The idea, for instance, that in 4 years in the White House, you can undo 60 years of cultural and moral revolution in the USA is pretty hard to take. And the only actually significant executive thing he seems to do is release all the people who invaded the Capitol building on the.
I mean, I think he's made some things happen
on that night in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's not going to be able to stop the problems with the border and the illegal migrants overnight. But certainly there seems to be some suggestion that he's setting about it already. He hasn't just not done anything about it, and people are apparently some people are apparently now deporting themselves, if you like, because they don't particularly want to be deported, arbitrarily. So they're going back the other way across the border.
Have you visited the U.S. border?
Not recently.
Well, I haven't visited recently, but I did some time ago. I made a point of spending some time down there with the Border Patrol, particularly near El Paso and Juarez. And it's an extraordinarily difficult thing to close because it's so long.
It's very porous.
So much of it runs through areas that are uninhabited. And I don't know quite how much you need to spend, both on electronic surveillance and on people, to seal it. But I think it would be an enormous task. Remember, his pledge in his first election was to build a great wall. But this is what I'm saying. So I don't think that works, and that's why, for that very reason, as you just outlined, that you can't really stop people coming. So what you have to do is what we keep saying to Keir Starmer you have to do, which is to discourage people from coming in the first place, making it clear that if they do come, they'll be sent straight back. Well, again, that's difficult though too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Rounding up huge numbers of people, and can you get the countries in which they came to take them back? Which is a problem which we have. The whole situation in international law, the countries which have illegal migration on a large scale, is very difficult because they've often concealed their origins when they arrived, and the countries from which they came can say, well, how can you prove these people came from our country? They've got no identity documents which we've issued. Why are you sending them back here? We don't want them. And then you're stuck. This is one of the real difficulties with illegal migration, But it is you can say we're going to send you back, but I remember my colleague Richard Littlejohn, when those Afghan hijackers arrived in this country, saying that they'll still be here in 20 years' time, and lo, they were.
Well, my favourite, one of my favourite stories of the last week or two has been the one from France, where this very kindly and sort of rather left-wing theatre group decided to open up its doors to do a theatre show for some illegal migrants who were hanging around in the town, and they've now decided to move in. So they finished.
Yeah, Fred Kelly did a very good piece in the Daily Mail about that the other day. Yeah,
they're still there.
It's also quite. There is an irony in it that these left-wing people suddenly found out what it was they were really promoting.
Yeah.
If you haven't read the Fred Kelly pieces, it was in last Saturday. Look it up on the internet. It is. It's a very good account of the event. It is.
And this morning we see in the Telegraph, 1 in 12 people in London is an illegal migrant, and not necessarily a person that's come on a small boat, but more likely to be actually a student who's overstayed a visa, or even somebody who's come on a work visa and who hasn't gone home. And so, once it starts, it's very difficult to stop it, isn't it?
Yeah, and you need a pretty tight police state to do much about it. People often say, "Oh, well, we should do this what the continental countries do and have a system of identity cards to control these people." But again, in France, which has such a system, there are hundreds of thousands of illegals living in France, pretty much unregulated, and they don't seem to be able to do anything about that, despite having a pretty strong state. I don't know what you do about it. This is the difficulty. Unless you stop people arriving in the first place, you have this immense difficulty of getting rid of them. And then, to me, very reluctantly, the task then falls on us to integrate and to end this ridiculous policy of state multiculturalism in which people are assumed to be separate, and to get people to become British. But for that to happen, you really are going to need a long moratorium during which the immigration was cut down.
Yeah, you'd have to stop. You just have to stop.
Minimum.
You'd have to stop asylum applications. I mean, we did that with Syria, didn't we? I think in the back end of last year, December, basically the UK and other European countries said they will suspend the processing of asylum applications from Syrians after the fall of the Assad regime. But I mean, equally, we went and looked for people, didn't we? Because the sort of the monetisation of the higher education sector, the ridiculous selling off of all of our universities was the result, which then led to people being sort of recruited, if you like, from all around the world, because these massive businesses wanted more and more students.
All kinds of people wanted there to be large-scale immigration, including a very big faction in New Labour. I still go back to the amazing article, which you can again still find on the web, by Andrew Neather, Neather, in which he describes, this is a New Labour apparatchik, describes the desire for there to be a large-scale migration to change the country, and which is never stated in public by anyone but him. I'm sure that the Labour apparatus have always been furious with Mr. Neither for revealing this, but they wanted it, and people, of course, wanted the servants, which is effectively what they are, which the new rich in London have taken advantage of. What large-scale migration often means is the availability of cheap servants on a large scale in this country for the first time since about 1914, and so they have a strong interest in it too, and other people just want cheap labour of other kinds. And the people, of course, who have to cope with this most of all are the people who don't benefit from it economically or socially, the poor, whose own wage levels are held down by large-scale immigration, and also who have to deal with the enormous pressure on housing, the health service and transport and education, which follows when you get mass immigration. It's a simple politics for anybody on either the left or the right that the time has come to put a strong limit on it. And this is why I think I've said to you before, the most fascinating politician in Europe is this left-wing woman, Sarah Wagenknecht in Germany, who turned to her left-wing comrades and said, "Why are you being so stupid? The reason why the neo-Nazis are doing well is not because German people are Nazis. They're not. They're just cheesed off, and they're entitled to be cheesed off. It's time that the left wing took on this issue and started being in favor of immigration restriction." And she's doing very well. People always go on and on about the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, the really right-wing party with the fishy people in it, but they never mention, you very seldom hear British media mentioning Sarah Wagenknecht, because the idea of a left-wing person being against mass immigration is quite disturbing to them, because it makes them wonder whether they ought to do the same thing. I wish they would. It's essential for social stability that we cope with the immigration we've already had, and I think that's probably the most civilized way of doing it. Getting people to leave a country on a large scale is very difficult to do, and it could also lead to quite serious problems of its own. So it's a reluctant acceptance. I've probably said more against mass immigration over the past 25 years than most people. Yeah. But if it's happened, you have a different problem.
Yeah, exactly right.
Is to bring an end to it, and then seriously set out to integrate those who come.
Yeah, absolutely, and then eventually you have to stop people coming. Peter, thank you very much indeed. Peter Hitchens, columnist at the Mail on Sunday, there with a view on a great many things. Let's get a voice note from James.
Morning, Mike. Superb speech from Trump the other night. Absolutely superb. He certainly loves America. No one can deny that. Not like our Prime Minister. My God, Mike, he puts my feet to sleep. He's so boring. There's nothing to him, Mike. He's literally just like a Dalek. Then you've got Lammy, Miliband, Cooper. Terrible, Mike. Absolutely terrible.
It's a terrible lineup, isn't it? You wouldn't put any of them out in the first team, normally speaking. James, well said. Thank you very much indeed. Just a quick one here. I've been meaning to read this out for a while. It's about immigration from Denise. She says, "Morning, Mike. I love your show. I'm French and came to England in 1977 to improve my English. I fell in love with the English people, met my husband and stayed here. I was traced by the police because I hadn't told the Home Office of my change of status. I've tried to become British, but this is very difficult and very expensive. Due to that, I'm not allowed to vote for the national election. I can for the local ones only. How come all the migrants have the right to vote? I had a business and employed a lot of people, paid all my tax in England. It's very strange." Well, I'm not sure migrants are allowed to vote unless they become citizens. They can, if they're European, well, they used to be, if they were European citizens, allowed to vote in local elections.